Welcome back. As we promised, we are going to speak about 200 years since the decipherment of Egyptian hieroglyphs and the creation of Egyptology. And the Ministry of Antiquities and Tourism announced that we are going to celebrate this occasion through many steps, many activities, many exhibitions, and also the Ministry of Culture is going to have its share. But to shed more light on what happened 200 years ago and to shed more light on the circumstances around what Champollion did and how this was a very important turning point in our modern history, we are very much delighted and honored to have with us live here in the studio our dear guest, Mr. Ihab Kamel, our historian, our Egyptologist, and our expert when it comes to Egyptology. Thank you very much for being with us, sir. And let's start immediately. What happened 200 years ago? What Champollion did, and how was the idea in the first place?
Well, let's get a little bit further in history. What happened 200 years ago was an earthquake that had shocked Egypt, a cultural shock. A country living the Middle Ages, literally, in a dark age during the time of Ottoman occupation, suddenly they find themselves in front of a major superpower, which was very scientifically, very strong, very scientifically developed. And this was a shock for the Egyptians at that time. At that time, nobody knew anything about Egypt. And as a matter of fact, Napoleon, when he came to Egypt, and this was in the 1st of July, 1798, he was, his intentions were military. He came to conquer a country, to threaten the road to India, which was the pearl of the British crown. But instead, Egypt had conquered them. Because he simply discovered a country which nobody in the world knew anything about except from the Bible. He discovered that it had a great heritage, and he had brought with him a number of scholars, scientists in human studies and applicable studies, and they had started studying everything about Egypt, including its history. Of course, the history had impressed them very much, especially that the ancient ancestors had left us all the ancient monuments in the Nile Valley, even the monuments in the desert. They're not that far from the Nile Valley.
The Nile.
Yes. So basically, they were very much impressed, and especially the scholars, they wanted to study this ancient civilization. But of course, nobody knew anything about it, especially that the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphic script was never deciphered. Nobody had ever... There had been early attempts by early Arab scholars like Ibn Wahshiyya, but they were not really that successful.
Yeah.
Until one day, of course, the situation for the French campaign had deteriorated. Napoleon had to leave. General Kleber had been assassinated. So in 1799, the General Minot became the head of the campaign, and he heard that there might be an invasion for Egypt by the British with the Ottomans. So he decided that he was going to fortify all the northern coast of Egypt until the Libyan borders. During the fortification, or the restoration of the ancient fortifications of a town on the west branch of the river called Rosetta, and overlooking the Mediterranean, an engineer officer, he was a lieutenant at that time, his name was François Bouchard. François Bouchard was actually a volunteer. He was not a working officer. He was originally an engineer who had volunteered, and he had the rank of a lieutenant. And as they were working on the restoration, the contractor at that time and his men, while they were removing an ancient wall, they found a huge piece of stone from black granite, written by 3 different scripts and 2 languages. Hieroglyphics, the fully drawn figures, the demotic, which they thought at the time that it was Cyrenaic.
Okay.
And ancient Greek. It became something very interesting for him, and he was a very clever man. So he had sent this stone to the scientific council in Cairo, which Napoleon had founded when he arrived. They started immediately deciphering the text in Greek, of course, because the ancient Greek language is not that much different from the
Close
Greek.
to the Latin?
No.
To the Greek language
that we
know.
speak nowadays
Okay.
is not that much different from the Greek language that the ancient Greeks had spoken. And Denon, the head of the scientific council, had made a rubber mold for the text. And as a matter of fact, it stayed among the collection of antiquities that the French had collected at the time. But the situation, the political situation in Egypt and worldwide did not help the French very much. What happened was that General Hutchinson, the commander of the British fleet in the Mediterranean, had started an embargo on the Egyptian coast, and the situation for the French campaign had started deteriorating, especially that all their fleet was sunk in the Abu Qir Bay or Canop Bay. They reached an agreement which was very humiliating for the French. That was, they would leave on British ships. And the British took all the antiquities that they had collected as a war booty. Surprisingly, General Hutchinson insisted on having this stone, the Rosetta Stone, without knowing its value. And we don't know why he insisted. So he took it, and since then it became possessed by the British Museum. Actually, Jean-François Champollion never saw it. The man who deciphered the Rosetta Stone. He did not see it until 22 years later.
Then he had only a copy or
a rubber
copy, and that's
a rubber
it.
mold.
Okay.
That's what he worked on, which was made by Denon, and he took it and he started working on it. Who is Champollion? Champollion is by all means a genius.
Yes.
Champollion, at the age of 13, he was the professor of Oriental languages in the University of Grenoble.
At the age of?
Sorry, 17.
Even 17? Only
Yes.
he was a teen when he was a professor?
Yes, he was a professor.
Oh.
So he actually noticed something on this stone which not many scholars had paid attention to, that some of these sound signs are separated from the rest of the text by an oval-shaped figure which he called cartouche. So he said, what is so special about these signs? They must be forming names of gods, maybe, or kings. His guessing was right. As he spoke ancient Greek, he was able to read the text, which was a royal decree, or it was like a declaration from the priests that they were thanking King Ptolemy V for exempting them from taxes and their temples, from all their taxes and duties. King Ptolemy V.
So he started with the letters on the cartouche.
Of course, because they were the most distinctive.
Okay.
Why are they separated from the rest of the text?
This leads to another step forward, and this is the way he did it?
Not completely, but he actually studied Coptic language, which is the language of liturgy in the Egyptian churches. And he discovered that this Coptic language is simply the ancient Egyptian language written in Greek letters, but within he discovered more than 8 ancient Egyptian letters, or you call them signs or characters, in demotic, used for the sounds that did not exist in Greek. So they were replaced by demotic letters. So he started by guessing at first. Then he knew the names of the kings mentioned from the Greek texts. Then he compared some of the signs with the signs he knew from the Coptic from the Coptic script, and he started knowing the first hieroglyphic signs. And one thing led to another. He managed to know lots of these sound characters and what do they stand for, and a bit by bit he started deciphering the Rosetta
Then
Stone.
he also made the differences between a letter and a sound, and maybe one letter, but to be used or to be used in this dialect or this language for as so many sounds, or vice versa, or I don't understand.
This was
how.
his second discovery, actually.
Okay.
He discovered that the ancient Egyptian language did not use any letters. It used characters like Chinese.
Characters and sounds, referring
Characters. The character
Yeah.
can be a sound, like A, B, C, D, E, F. But the character at the same time can be a word, a full word, like Ankh, the key of life. This is pronounced Ankh, A, N, and Kha. It's in one sign. So, which means life. So life can be one character. So he discovered that the Egyptians had used these characters for sounds, for single sounds, and to represent a word, very similar to Chinese writing.
But the Chinese alphabet, I think it's about 1,000 letters.
No, actually, you have more than 500,000 characters in Chinese, and each one of them, it means it's a word.
Okay. Let's return back to us. By the way, is it Rosetta Stone or Stela?
Stone.
Okay.
Because usually the stela, it's used for funerary purposes more.
Returning back to us and to the Rosetta Stone and to what happened after that. I mean, what was the first step taken after this wonderful discovery?
Of course, the first step that he went to see it in the British Museum, and he went 2 years after the deciphering of the Rosetta Stone in 1824. He deciphered it completely in 14th of September 1822. He did not go to the British Museum to see it, to see the real thing, until 1824.
No, I mean, sir, if you permit me to maybe to ask my question in other words, how was the start of Egyptology?
Simply, you cannot understand the ancient Egyptian civilization and analyze the ancient Egyptian cult and social life without understanding the language.
The language, yeah.
So this was the key to the room of secrets of the ancient Egyptian civilization.
I mean, our scholars were told by him he was responsible for holding a group or creating a group who would be responsible for that, and to go to the walls of the temples, to the papyrus, and to read and to tell the whole world about the greatness of the Egyptian civilization. How was this a turning point?
First of all, he made a book, a dictionary, speaking about the ancient Egyptian language and explaining it and explaining the signs and the grammar. The first dictionary in history for ancient Egyptian language.
To French?
It was French, yes,
Okay.
and it was
Then
made
it
in
was
French.
French.
It was called Précis du système d'hiéroglyphes. This was the first. Then later on, lots of other scholars had continued what Champollion had started. And of course, one of them was the great English scholar Sir Alan Gardner, which we study from his dictionary up till nowadays.
Oh.
It's called Egyptian grammar. Of course,
Grammar?
yes, it had grammar. It had pronouns, it had prepositions, phonetics,
Linguistics.
exactly, all the elements of linguistics. And this shows the greatness of the Egyptian civilization, the power of the
Exactly
written word.
when there was an Egyptian who was able just to go to any temple, to any wall on any temple, and just to read like that as if we're reading English or Arabic.
Mid-19th century. Mid-19th century, we had Egyptologists, and at that time, this branch of knowledge was still new. So there were lots of imposters involved, and more like, you can say, opportunists who want to get some pieces of antiquities and make a fortune out of it. But there were also lots of scholars who had started working, and a bit by bit, the ancient Egyptian history had started to become clear. Don't forget that in those days, Europe was very interested to prove that the stories of the Bible were true. So this was an excellent opportunity to verify the stories of the Holy Bible. Surprisingly, they never found any scientific evidence up till nowadays that confirms that these stories had ever happened. But
in the first place.
Exactly. But it fascinated the world.
Yeah.
The world discovered that there was a great civilization called Egypt, and it became a fascination for all the European elites. Every European nobleman, as part of his education, he used to have the grand tour visiting Italy and Greece, because Greece is the base of the
Another
European
civilization. The base of the European civilization.
Of the European civilization.
Yeah.
But for them, they added Egypt as well. They discovered Egypt was much more ancient. And by the discovery of more and more ancient monuments, they discovered that this civilization had offered to the human race two very important things.
The discovery, or what Champollion did, it was the base. It was the start.
That was the key.
It was the key. Who continued on the same path? I mean, it's of course a combination of experiences. And of course, the Egyptians had their share.
Yes, and surprisingly, they started very early. It's enough to tell you that by the late 19th century, you had young Egyptian archaeologists involved in one of the most important discoveries in the 19th century, the discovery of the cachet of Deir el-Bahari. Who was with them? Ahmad Effendi Kamel, who became later on Ahmad Pasha Kamel.
Yeah.
The first director of the Department of Antiquities, and later on Dr. Selim Hassan, who had been the great idols for every Egyptian Egyptologist or archaeologist. So those people, they had the knowledge, they had the know-how at a very early age. So we were not that far behind in Egypt. No, we started actually very early.
Yeah. One final question regarding this occasion. How we can celebrate that? I mean, this is an occasion, this is something which should not go en passant, as the French are saying. How we can celebrate that? We have just 2 minutes.
Simply, the Rosetta Stone is not the only stone like this that was found. We had found many others which are just as important. In Kamel in Bubastis, I believe that we should have a room, a special room in the new museum that exhibits all these stones with a replica of the Rosetta Stone. And this is the most practical way, from the way I see it, that we can, on an occasion like this, we can exhibit all of these, and with the replica, hoping that one day we can retrieve it back.
Inshallah, along with the head of Nefertiti from Berlin Museum. This is my dream. Well, as usual, I learn a lot. And as usual, it's an honor to have you, sir. Thank you very much for being with us. And inshallah, we are going to leave you, but with the promise to see you again in more episodes of our programs. We were very much delighted to have with us Mr. Ihab Kamel, our historian, our researcher, and our Egyptologist. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Well, right after the short break, we are going to return back with more, so stay tuned.